Welcome back, everyone. It's now time to talk about some labor and employment issues. Bringing the program is the fast pace of your service causing hidden wage and hour issues to lurk. Ooh, sounds ominous. But we've got two terrific thought leaders joining us today from the national labor and employment law firm of Phillips. Joining us is Emily Litzinger. Emily is a partner in the Louisville office, and she's a core member of the National Hospitality Industry Group at Phillips. She also serves on the board of directors for the Kentucky Restaurant Association. And in 2020, Emily was honored with the Supplier of the Year award by the Kentucky Restaurant Association for her contributions to the organization. Please welcome Emily. Joining Emily today from the Fisher and Phillips firm, Mr. Alden Parker. Alden practices out in the California area, another ominous thought. But he's the regional managing partner in the Sacramento office, and he co-chairs the National Hospitality Industry Group. Alden is one of the legal center partners for the California Restaurant Association and also a member of that association's Employment Law Center. Please welcome Alden. And Alden, take it away.
All right, thank you, Stephen. Really appreciate being here with everybody, and so glad to have my partner Emily with us as we talk about some of these wage and hour issues. When Emily and I were thinking about a program to present here, we thought about what is it that is unique about quick service and fast casual that might cause some of these wage and hour issues to lurk and not be focused on because of the pace of how fast we're going. And so we wanted to go ahead and highlight what, for us, we see in our experience as really the top issues and problems that may be out there that probably need some attention. Everybody's been very, very focused, obviously, on the pandemic and how to run successful operations during that time. And we want to make sure we don't lose the focus on some of the bread and butter wage and hour issues that are out there facing this unique segment of the restaurant industry. So we're going to talk about these issues out here today, and Emily's going to chime in when I'm speaking. Sometimes Emily's going to be presenting, and I'll go ahead and speak. But these are really what's on the menu today: minimum wage, tip pools, overtime, misclassification, meal and rest breaks, and final pay. There are some sub issues in there that I'm sure we're all going to go ahead and hit on as we go through. But these are the top 6 issues that Emily and I think are impacting this particular segment as a result of its fast pace. So Emily, if you want to go ahead and take it away and jump in here.
Well, thank you very much. I'm happy to be here with everybody today. So one of the most frequent issues that we see in the quick service restaurant industry is issues surrounding the failure to pay the requisite minimum wage. So currently the federal minimum wage is $7.25 per hour, but depending on where you're located, so certain states and localities have a higher minimum wage, and employers in those areas are subject to that higher threshold. So the buzz is recently, could we see a higher minimum wage at the federal level? And it's yet to be known whether or not that's going to take effect, but that's certainly something to keep your eye out for in the coming year. Recently, we've also seen a pretty significant uptick with child labor law violations. So I've seen a lot of targeted auditing in this quick service restaurant industry for this particular issue. And even with very technical violations, you could see some significant penalties being assessed. So the child labor laws, there's federal standards, but there's also state standards that tend to be a little bit more restrictive.
Yeah, and Emily, that's a great point. I mean, this is so difficult for a lot of our multi-unit operator clients to deal with, where we're going ahead and reaching out to all of our different offices to figure out what the state minimum wage is, how that differs from the federal minimum wage, whether that state allows for a tip credit, which is also a little bit under assault with the change of administration and the push for an increase to a $15 national minimum wage, and eliminating the tip credit. But even out here in California and in other states, you've got a minimum wage that goes down to the city level. And so you could be in one state and you could have multiple different minimum wages you have to go ahead and pay attention to. Makes it extremely challenging. Emily, what's next for us?
Next, we've got tip pooling. So if you want to, there you go. So tip pooling, this is a pretty highly controversial topic over the last 10 years or so. The rules tend to flip and flop back and forth depending on either where you're located or who's in power. They can also vary pretty significantly depending on where you're located. So from state to state, that's going to vary as well. Often in fast casual restaurants, we see our clients utilizing the tip pools to minimize the burden of labor costs. And oftentimes that pool is split between maybe the front of the house and the back of the house. And depending on where you're located and how that pool is set up, that could be a potential for some liability as well. So it's something to be aware of.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. And you're absolutely right. I mean, we definitely have a lot of focus on tip pooling, whether a federal or state standard is going to allow chain of service and back of the house employees to participate or not. These are hot issues. The one universal issue I would say, Emily, and I'm sure you probably agree with this, you've got to make sure you're keeping your managers out of the tip pool,
Yes.
Those with supervisory responsibility. And some of the touch points in fast casual will come down to those shift leaders you have there that are doing production work paid on an hourly basis, and whether or not those individuals should or shouldn't be included in a tip pool. You'll have to go ahead and take a look at your individual jurisdiction on that. It's a difficult issue.
Yeah, we have a special jurisdiction here in Kentucky where we prohibit all mandatory tip pools. So I deal a lot of, working with clients on that issue as well.
All right. Well, let's hit the next issue.
All right. So overtime, this is a pretty good area that we see that wage and hour issues still lurk. The business is moving quickly. Often hours are worked and they're not accounted for. So then that messes with the overtime being properly paid. So let's see, most often I see it before off the clock work, before a shift or after a shift, maybe a bank run after a shift, and those hours aren't accounted for and thus overtime is not paid. So obviously the FLSA requires time and a half for any hours over 40, even if we're not properly accounting for those. So that's something to be aware of as well.
Yeah, that's a great highlight. Emily, and I don't know if in your jurisdiction we're getting this, but out here, in California, we're deviating from this idea that there is a de minimis amount of time that could exist in a shift that is unpaid for. It used to be fairly accepted that timekeeping practices, especially in a fast casual or fast-paced environment, couldn't account for every minute that someone worked.
Right.
And so there was going to be a little bit of slack built in where employers might not end up capturing all of that time. Right. That's gone away here in California, and it seems to be the trend in other jurisdictions where even a 2-minute period of time, a 1-minute period of time, if they're in a line for a security check or something like that, is compensable time and has to be tracked. Emily, what are you seeing in your jurisdiction?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely dealt with that recently with some Department of Labor investigations. People saying they were working off the clock right before, either help cleaning up, that sort of issue, and we're still getting dinged for that time. So I definitely think that being aware of what work is being done and who's working is really important to have some measures in there to assure that you're not going to be liable for that time.
Okay, great. Well, let's move on.
So I'm passing it back to you.
Okay, thank you so much. So we're going to sort of flip-flop roles here, and I'm going to be looking to Emily to provide some look into what jurisdiction she may be familiar with or has been working on and how some of these issues fit in. Certainly in our industry, though, misclassification, it continues to be a hot topic at the state level and at the federal level. Most of the time it has to do with people classifying individuals that are doing too much production work on the line, or in the kitchen, and they're jumping in, and too much of their day is spent on that production level work. In those instances, we are running into misclassification cases that have a sometimes an okay chance of winning. So we need to make sure we're closely analyzing what the specific job duties are that someone is engaged in on a day-to-day basis in that shift leader responsibility, assistant manager responsibility, or location manager. Those just continue to plague this industry here. As minimum wage goes up, you'll see that the salary basis for this exempt test will come more into play, because oftentimes the salary test is going to be based on what the minimum wage is, and it's going to be a multiple of that minimum wage in certain states like California or other places. Well, as the minimum wage goes up, doubling the salary goes up in those jurisdictions to meet a salary test for exemption, and it gets very, very expensive very quickly to classify someone as exempt, even if you're meeting the duties test. So be leery of that. As you see these minimum wages increase, those salaries also have to increase, and it gets really, really expensive.
Yeah,
Emily, out there.
On that point, I think I've seen a lot of misclassification when it comes to maybe like an assistant manager. It's not, what I've seen with my clients is that they're slapping that manager title behind that individual's name, but when you really drill down and look at what their job duties are, they're not meeting that test to be exempt. And I've seen several people get some penalties assessed for the failure to pay overtime for those individuals as well.
Okay, great. The next issue we wanted to highlight were meal and rest breaks. Federal law doesn't have specific lunch breaks or coffee breaks. That's something that goes ahead and lots of people provide. Lots of times they're in that 5 to 20 minute range, and they're compensable periods of time. But you do have some unique states with their own requirements for specific meal and rest breaks, and they can be very, very difficult to comply with in this fast casual industry here, where we're moving so fast to get people a 10-minute break in the first 4 hours of a workday, a 30-minute meal period before the end of the 5th hour, a second 10-minute break within the next 4-hour block of period of time becomes very, very difficult to go ahead and track and manage. And there's some strategies that we'll talk about in the deeper dive to go ahead and deal with meal and rest period compliance, whether you're required under federal law or some state law, or not required under federal law, or if there's a state law that requires you to do it. We've got some strategies that I'll go ahead and talk about once we get to the deeper dive session. Emily, I know that you and I were talking offline, and you talked about child labor rules regarding this and some issues that you've seen. Could you tell everybody about that?
Yeah, I mean, here in Kentucky, we have the ability to waive, as for adults, to waive this lunch break. So if an employee and employer agree, they can waive that time period. But what I'm finding is that what the rules are here locally is that you can't do that for a minor. It's absolutely not waivable. So I've seen that issue arise, just employers not being aware that that's an issue. But also, as I'm echoing what you said, it is a little bit of like Jenga, trying to balance all of these breaks and lunch breaks for everybody when you have multiple shifts and it's a quick pace, and you have rush periods, so you need all bodies there, and trying to make it between that time, the appropriate time period. So it is definitely challenging when things are moving quickly. Yeah.
I mean, there are a few industries that are as good as watching and organizing their labor costs as the restaurant industry. We know when customers come in, we know when the peak hours are, we know how many individuals it takes to go ahead and service what we count on a Tuesday in February or a Thursday in April. We know historical data on how many customers we can expect and how many labor units we need for that. That's amazing to go ahead and do, but in part of that needs to be built out, this meal and rest period compliance. And Emily, I thought it was fascinating, that issue about the child labor law. Definitely something to watch out for, how there may be one set of rules for all of these different components for adults and a different set of rules for minors that might be working in these establishments.
Yes. All right.
So the other issue we wanted to touch on real quick, this final pay issue, it's heartbreaking to me when we've done everything right compliance-wise as an employer, and we get to the end and we screw up the departure. I start from the assumption, I'm sort of a cold-hearted management side employment lawyer. I start from the assumption that all of your employment relationships are going to end at some point. They're not going to last forever. It's very unique that that would happen. So I'm going to play those odds. And at the end of the day, there are all sorts of rules that go ahead and apply to final paychecks, to making sure that all of the issues are paid for, all of the time is paid for at the end, and that we're not going ahead and engaging in illegal deductions at the very end that are going to take people below the minimum wage for their final pay cycle. That's a dead bang loser, and in certain states it will cause penalties of up to 30 days at the person's regular rate of pay. So if you miss the mark by even a couple dollars, at a minimum wage employee in a higher minimum wage state, it can cost thousands. And it's just a tragedy to be able to see that. I'll have some specific examples of that during the deeper dive.
Yeah, I would just say one of the issues I see on this is inconsistencies about paying out vacation time and what your policy is. And here I'm right on the border of Kentucky and Indiana, and there's, I deal with employers on both sides of the river, and they're different rules. And so I think it's just being aware of what the rules are in your jurisdiction and being consistent with your practices with that final pay and vacation pay.
Wow. So just a river decides which unit is going to be governed by what rules. They could probably take a couple minutes and drive to another unit and have a whole set of different rules.
Yeah, because we've got a lot of clients that are, in the Louisville area and then on the other side of the river. So
yeah, that raises a lot of interesting issues that, at least in California, we're pretty expansive, so we don't run into. But Emily, I wanted to add sort of a bonus issue here while I have you in your mind. If you're having employees go from, let's say, one location to another, and they're in two different states next to each other, how is that being treated from a wage and hour perspective? If they go from Indiana one day, their next shift is at the location over in Kentucky.
Right. I mean, so certainly, obviously, for the same employer, you're gonna, all those hours worked are gonna go towards the same threshold for overtime. But I think that they're similar enough. I think taking a more conservative approach, so like whatever the most restrictive jurisdiction is, that's what my advice would be for those clients is just to be a little more conservative, just to ensure that you're not on the hook.
Yeah, that's a good rule of thumb, and you just have to sort of know which state is going to be more employee friendly or employer friendly, and then go ahead and create your practices to suit whatever the stricter of those two is, so that you're in compliance with both if you're going to move employees from one location to another to cover shifts. I know that happens in this industry quite a bit. So, Emily, why don't you take us out here about some of the common themes we've seen here?
Yeah, so some of the common things, we've already kind of mentioned it, but this off the clock work is a pretty hot one. Failure to pay for training. So those are still hours worked, even if they're not working, in the restaurant itself. Improper exemptions, we talked about that as well. And I will say, in my experience, at least in the last year or so, is I've seen a lot of targeted audits, Department of Labor audits in the quick service restaurant industry around here. And it seems to be a bit of a theme for our local enforcement. And they're just knocking on everyone's door. And it's what oftentimes are very just minor technical violations end up resulting in pretty significant penalties from a client. So I think it's just being aware of what the issues could be, the potential landmines, and planning for those in the future. We look forward to discussing these in the deeper dive a little bit further. Thank you.
Right. Thanks, everybody. Emily, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Emily, Alden, that was just terrific. We'll look forward to the deeper dive. Some great hot points, as you pointed out for us. Just terrific stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, I do want to make sure you know that if you go to the Fisher Phillips website, they have tremendous resources available for you there. So I would encourage you to check that out before the deeper dive if you get an opportunity, because there's some real value there. Emily, Alden, can't thank you enough. We'll look forward to the deeper dive.
Thank you, everybody.